Okay. So back to the Middle Ages, I wanted to share with you this. Here. Okay. Can you see this picture?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. This is an image of Constantinople, which was the capital of the Byzantine Empire during the European Middle Ages. Maybe like, late antiquity or even like, into, eventually was not at its height, maybe around like, the year 1000, 1100. Excuse me. The it looks very Roman, and it was the sort of like the Eastern, what really was considered to be the Eastern Roman Empire, but it was really the largest and wealthiest city in I guess what you could still call it a European city, but maybe not. But anyway, big, prosperous for a while because it was closed off. When there was some like disease, like when bubonic plague hit Constantinople, it was extremely devastating. So wars, disease, famine, always all these things work against some of these ancient cities. But it's kind of nice to see an image of what it might have looked like at its height. Okay, try stop that. Back to this. Pardon me, just a little bit. All right, I'll just share my entire screen, which I should have done in the first place. All right, that is the early Christian one. We'll close that. So now we'll move on to Gothic. Gothic is the late Middle Ages in Europe in terms of its architecture and design. Now here is a diagram of a church wall with the flying buttress, which is there you go. Up at the top there, you can see the flying buttress, which is this extra bit. The upright buttress is really the larger vertical structure on the outside of the church. So a buttress is just something to hold something else up. So this tall, like what looks like a column that's not supporting anything above it, but it's really supporting the wall next to it. That buttress is taller than it's taller than the section it's supporting, and then those flying buttresses are really just attached to the buttress and then to the wall, or to this, like, this what really is the interior column and the interior structure, so this can go taller. It allows that support from the outside, which is this load-bearing device, means that wall with the windows on it can be thinner, and because the wall itself is not supporting any weight, is not really like part of the load-bearing system. So it allowed for larger interior spans and thinner, like lighter walls, and so they could open up the windows to be larger, which they also decorated with stained glass. Now here is some variation. The medieval churches were very, I think, I think they were very imaginative, you could say. They reinterpreted ancient columns, like ancient column design, like the ancient capitals. So instead of the acanthus leaf, they used an oak leaf or some other type of leaf. And because the oak leaf is really more from the climate of Northern Europe. And so they really like took that idea of this leafy design for the capital and made it their own. So Gothic ribbed vaulting. Let's go back here. Okay, so the right side, it's just like diagram C here, is a ribbed vault where the structure of the structure, this like really the structural element is right here on the really it's a pointed arch. So instead of being a rounded arch, they have this pointed arch, and the pointed arch is, like a barrel vault or a groin vault were all based off of a circular arch. And so the ribbed vault is based off of the pointed arch. And so really it's a series of intersecting pointed arches. And so here you can see on the ceiling, the structure is the rib. And then this, allows the roof to be made lighter. And here are these clerestory windows, these tall, these really tall, thin windows are called lancet windows. And you can see this really a lot of light. It's like really just windows all around. These walls up here don't have to, they're not load bearing at all. The load is all here in the column. So Saint Denis is a church in France, and the choir is a section that's back behind and off to the side of the altar. It's in front of the altar. So you can see what the ribbed vaulting looks like. This is early, so it's similar to that Durham Cathedral. Now look at those the two capitals of the columns are different. So a uniform architectural order really just wasn't part of what they were doing. You can see here, there's like these pointed arches. You can see there is a keystone, which is really this like wedge-shaped stone that helps hold the arch together. Notre Dame in Paris, which sadly, if you may know this, burned last year, and the roof is gone. This spire is made of cast iron. It's made of cast iron, and was added in the 19th century. But this church was built in the 12th century. This is the facade. I forget which direction this is, but it's the west facade with these three portals. So if you look at the arches have a point to them, and different from it's different from the Roman circular arch. You can see the circular rose window, and you see arches within arches, which the Romans did that too. They'd have like one big arch and then two smaller arches on the inside. And these these towers, these are like bell towers, and then the spire is this big, tall, really like a big, tall, pointed tower. That's the plan. And here's the interior of Notre Dame. When this burned, there was a fire. They were doing a renovation. There was a fire in the scaffolding up near the roof. it completely destroyed the roof. The cast iron spire fell, but the rib vaulting, most of the rib vaulting stayed intact. So here again, that comparison with the Romanesque and the Gothic. And the Triforia is the area above. So the arcade is on the outside, where you have a series of arches down at the ground level. And then a Triforia is this area above the arcade and the ground level. Here, flying buttresses, pinnacles, and crockets, and finials. The pinnacles are these smaller little towers that are really more just like decorative, very pointy. There's a sharpness to Gothic architecture. It's almost like looks like it's kind of like, I don't know, menacing in some ways. The crockets are these, like, you can see these like little like buds here that are really like these little curled, it's like a little curled up leaf that's ready to, open up, but it's just kind of curled up. And a finial is like this, like on the top. A finial is something that, like a decorative bit that is placed on top of something. This is Chartres Cathedral with some of the nicest stained glass. You can see these two spires that are different heights. They were built at different times. And they had no problem deciding, well, one of them got hit by lightning and fell up and fell. We'll rebuild it. We can build it taller now. We're going to make a nicer spire the second time. They didn't really worry about symmetry. Here, you're not going to need to know every bit of this, but this diagram can be helpful for you to see what all the parts of a Gothic church are. Now, cathedrals are a type of church, and a cathedral is where a bishop of a region has his, it's kind of like the bishop's home church. And if you don't know, Catholics, priests are like ministers. They, are part of a church, but they're religious, leaders. They officiate the church service. A bishop is like a regional boss to within the church. So here's an image of Chartres in the nave looking toward the altar and the apse. The apse is that end of the church, the curving section. And that apse is where the altar is. The altar is always going to be down here at the end. Here is a triforium with these very interesting little, it's almost like it's like kind of like they redesigned a Corinthian column, but took the acanthus leaf out and just left the curvy leaf. Rose window and lancet windows from Chartres. You can see here's a close-up of this lancet window depicting the tree of Jesse from the Bible. Very intricate work. So stained glass is sort of like this, this like feature. It's like something that it's where the Gothic ornament. It's like one of the places where Gothic art really shines is in stained glass. And this one, Saint Pierre, I like this church just because it's so small. It's like this, like smushed up. It looks like a monster of some sort. But you can see how spiky and sharp it is. It's like all these pinnacles. So here are all these pinnacles just kind of like stabbing up into the sky here, little tiny pinnacles here. And the tracery is just like the framing of the windows. So this stone tracery is very elaborate, very beautiful. You can see these windows are done in like these 3 sections of 3. That is a trefoil or trefoil design. It's kind of like a clover, like a 3-leaf clover. These are the vaults and bovees. So if you look at this church, it looks heavy, it looks massive, and inside there's so many windows that on a nice day, a lot of light comes in. And they're nice, and these are like tall spaces. Now in England, there is Gothic architecture, and it's a little different, a little lighter in terms of color. They're using a lighter stone, but it has the same, the ribbed vaulting. This is a very clear image with the ribbed vaulting, the pointed arch, and this, like the clustered column is a feature where they take this column and make it look like it's a bundle of columns, and all of the ribbed vaulting just kind of spreads out from it. Now the English, there is a nice the clustered columns. And the English, in this church, in this like chapter house in the Salisbury Cathedral, there's this example of a fan vault, which is really, you have this like central column, and it allows the ribs from the vaulting to just fan out in all directions. Quite beautiful. Over here, the windows you can see are example of what's called a foil. A foil is a leaf, and so here's a quatrefoil, which is 4 little petals, I guess you could say. And then here has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yes. People don't really say octafoil, but it's a foil window. Okay, so this wire screen. You can see there's like where they have this, like it's kind of like an arcade with this series of columns, but it's just kind of like a decorative ornament. It's up against, it's just built as a part of a wall. The tomb of a saint. So here you can see up on this ornament, you can see these crockets, which are really these curled up leaves. And this tomb is designed with all the features of Gothic, with the quatrefoil opening, pointed arch, and this partial trefoil arch, cluster of columns, and you can see the quatrefoil here and here. Zowie, look at that. So they really start to, I think they start to figure, a lot of this is it's stone carving, but they really do kind of, in some cases here, they really are pulling out all the stops. It's really quite beautiful. So it's very, it's monochrome. It is achromatic. There's really it's just the color of the stone. But man, The carving on this stuff is gorgeous. Okay. Bishop's Throne at Exeter Cathedral. Little miniature architecture with like a little spire above. A spire above the Bishop's Throne. So here's an example of a like the throne, a seat of honor for the bishop, being a very special place. So you wouldn't just like decide like, oh, I'm going to go sit in the bishop's chair. They wouldn't let you. All right. So that is Gothic, and really I want you to be able to identify the difference between Gothic and Romanesque. That's something very important to be able to do. And lastly, for tonight, I'm going to talk about some medieval interiors. And furnishings. There is a little bit of furniture from this era that survives. Not that much, and some of it's not in that good of shape, and some of it's pretty elementary. Okay. So you can see, and this is a residential. This is residential architecture, of course, for the wealthy. And you can see this type of trestle arch, or I guess it's a trestle structure up here. Similar kinds of windows to the church. And let's move around to get some of the furniture. It's pretty simple furniture, and in these days they didn't have a lot of furniture. So when they, the people who had furniture that was worth, that was really worth anything, were the people like kings and nobility, some merchants, but it took a while before there actually were. Wealthy merchants. So this hammer beam truss is what that is called. And a lot of the medieval interiors were very sparsely furnished. Here, there's a banquet. So everybody comes in, they move the furniture in for the banquet. And when the banquet is over, put it away. They didn't leave the stuff out. There was a feature of the Middle Ages is that they were very nomadic, and if you were because of war, famine, disease, sometimes you had to just get out of town. And so let's say if you're a member of the nobility, whether you're in the royal ruling royal family or some other important person, you might have multiple estates where you would have houses in different places. And if you had to go from one to another, well, let's say there's a war coming, there's a war brewing, and you got to move to a different location, or there is plague or famine. What you would do is take all your stuff with you. They took their furniture, their valuables were portable. So instead of large paintings, they had large tapestries made. So woven tapestries that could be rolled up. Furniture had to be portable. If it wasn't, they made it really heavy and impossible to, so if their castle was invaded, they would have to, like if their manor house was invaded, they would take everything of value and maybe leave some built-in furniture that was really just not even worth stealing. Okay, so This is from an illuminated manuscript of the King Charles V sitting in this chair, which looks, it has this sort of like, appears to have this X frame design to it, and his little dude presenting him with this manuscript. And you can see there's a decorative element of the fleur-de-lis, this attempt at a trefoil arch right here, not pointed. Looks like they kind of tried to squeeze it in there. All right. Another page from an illuminated manuscript. This stepped buffet. So in terms of furniture, that red piece of furniture back in the corner with all the stuff on, with the vases and other, I guess, vessels on it. That was an interesting, it's a status symbol, is what it is. And it was where you displayed your finest valuables. And if you had if you were of a certain status, you might have a four-stepper. So you would have four levels on your buffet, and you would display your finest, valuables that could be presented this way. And if you were a more important person, you would have a 5-step buffet, maybe up to 6. Maybe you were just a 3-stepper. But it was an interesting status symbol that these buffets have, a role in one's status. And the reason we know about these things is that now, in this period of time, we get, there are some surviving inventories of some of the wealthy, and so they have all their stuff written down. This is a painting from the, really, I guess, Renaissance. It's still like Renaissance era, very early, because you can see the evidence of linear perspective. But in Northern Europe, they hung on to a lot of Gothic detailing. Like you can see, this is the Italians at this time in 1463 were already well into their resuscitation of the Roman design. But since they didn't really have that so much in Northern Europe, Gothic hangs on as kind of like this classic style. But what I like about this painting is that it gives you some impression of what domestic architecture looked like on the inside in this period of time in the 15th century. And artwork is one of the ways we have, one of the ways that, I guess it's one of the ways we know what things look like. So there are really 3 ways. One of them I mentioned, inventories. We know what people had because they wrote it down. Sometimes it's because they were being taxed on it. Sometimes it was for to keep a record of what one owned for one's estate. Maybe someone was being sued. People were sued in these days. People had to pay taxes. This is like part of what we consider to be the modern age is already happening now in the 15th century. I'm sorry. Inventories is one way we know what people had. Artwork, we can see the designs, we can see what is in this interior based on this artwork. And in some cases, we have surviving examples of pieces of furniture. Here's another one from the same era. Really like Gothic domestic interiors. It's a scene from the Bible. It is the Annunciation. to the Virgin that she's going to bear the Christ child. And but that interior is, it's interesting that they would, it's pretty common in this time that they would present a biblical story of story from like a Christian story, but it was presented in a contemporary setting. Here is from an Italian from the Italian city of Florence in the 14th century, so that's 1300s. You can see this is kind of common that the interior would be very sparsely furnished. They would either store it away or they just didn't have that much. Because, as I said, if they had to move from one place to another, and they often did, they needed to be able to bring it with them if it was valuable at all. If they could replace it, then they would, just leave it behind. So this is interesting. You can see this, like this furniture. So this is like simple furniture. It's like this trestle table. So you can see there's this structural support across the center on the bottom, and these very flat shapes, cut from wood that form the leg. Similar to these, like these chairs are very similar. There's just like a flat back. The interior is interesting, and it looks like this is some like meant to look like a tapestry, but it's not. You'll see this. What is like I've mentioned this with the Romans. Trompe l'oeil is a type of illusionistic painting that to make a flat surface look like it's got something three-dimensional on it. Tapestries. I mentioned tapestries. The tapestries were a way of demonstrating your wealth. You could afford to commission a tapestry of something, either historical scene, mythological scene, or a religious scene, which is usually what was one of those was was usually one of those subjects. So the Bayeux tapestry is early, pretty childlike. This is you can see this like where they were at in terms of representation and what they could accomplish with tapestry. A few centuries later, and they're doing this. Much more realistic. It's faded, so it's a little hard to see everything. But really what this is woven in fabric, in vertical and horizontal threads. These are some types of cabinets. Now this is this is like kind of, it's kind of funny. An English chest made from a solid log with this big log just kind of hollowed out and held together with these big iron straps. But this is it's an indication of how, like in some cases, very simple. And even this ornament with this chip carving, pretty elementary stuff. This is kind of like, they kind of like got sent back when Rome fell. A little bit later, this is actually, this is early 1500s, this panel and frame construction. So you have the frame here. These panels are separate, that are like separate pieces. And you can see it has a linen fold design. It's this like relief, this like decorative relief that is meant to look like a folded piece of fabric, which is a Gothic ornamental feature. Here, a little bit more. This is earlier than that other one, with this very like typical sharp Gothic ornament. There's the linen fold down here. So like a wall, there's like this, like a storage chest is, that's some of the furniture. And some of these like big, heavy pieces of furniture, they're durable. That's why some of them survived. This from Italy. The Italians were kind of ahead of the rest of the Europeans. This is very kind of beautiful. And here are some chairs, some like old like photographs of some chairs from the 16th century. Early attempts at upholstery. This is very, has like, similarities to Egyptian, maybe Roman designs. And here, this one, this is like, it's kind of beat up, to be fair. It's remarkable that it even exists. And here is a folding armchair. And this is an illustration of one. And you can see this is just really made with flat pieces. Here, an Italian iron stool. I'm gonna guess that there was a cushion meant to be put on there. But pretty, that's kind of interesting. Very utilitarian. And finally, a little bit about the architecture. There is like the English half timber, which was a sort of a domestic. This is like a domestic type of domestic architecture that goes back to the very early, like 15th century, late Middle Ages, early modern era. And you can see where there's the wooden structure, and then there's the sort of like plaster filling in, which is pretty light. This kind of architecture is not good. Like I think when the English settlers, people who left England, came to the Americas and tried to build this kind of architecture in places like New England, it was too cold. And you can see the way this structure sort of like sticks out. The upper floors get larger. The square footage is increased as this building goes up. Looking a little bit unstable over here, but hey, it's old, right? Good stuff. Now, any questions about that? Okay.
When did the Middle Ages end?
Depends on where you're at in Europe. In Italy, so the Italian peninsula was made up, it was like a bunch of different smaller, cities and regions that were independent of each other. But then the city of Florence, you could argue that in the beginning of the 15th century, like early on, around the year 1410, a guy named Filippo Brunelleschi demonstrated the method of linear perspective for creating images that reproduce the way we see. And from that point on, especially in that region, it slowly got out to the rest of Europe and the rest of the world. But that happened very early. So in Italy, Rome, Siena, all like different cities all around the Italian peninsula, the Middle Ages ended like early in the 15th century. A lot of it hung on, but later in Europe, north of the Alps, it took longer. So in some cases, I think the medieval style persisted into the 15th century.
Okay, so do you think of, I'm confused. Thank you for that, but
Mm.
so Middle Ages and what's the other synonym for it?
Medieval.
Okay. Okay, great. And
It's really more like an adjective.
and then Gothic design and architecture is going on at that time, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so in some ways, didn't we start seeing some of that Gothic tendency all the way back to the, let's say, 1100s, or not really?
I think we did. The Durham Cathedral.
Okay, that was like 13 or 12-ish or something?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so Durham Cathedral, really like in the Romanesque period, where you have there are clear Roman elements in the architecture,
Okay.
which is kind of a big deal because before that point it was like, they were still trying to get back to to get something back like what the Romans had. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think I have to plot it out. I'm getting the timeline mixed up, but that was helpful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It is Gothic and Romanesque are architectural styles, you could say,
Great.
and they both fall within the European Middle Ages. And the European Middle Ages is often referred to as medieval. And that is a synonym for Middle Ages. So, and what is what the Italians started is referred to it's sort of it's a decorative term to call what the Italians did the Renaissance, which means it's a rebirth. Renaissance is a French term, and it was coined much later than the 15th century, and but it really is. I think it is. And it's accurate to say that it is a rebirth because there were a lot of discoveries during that period of time that allowed them to access the knowledge of the ancient Greeks and Romans. Certain texts were rediscovered. They figured out the engineering of some of the Roman buildings because the Roman, the Pantheon is still there, and the Pantheon was there for them to go and look at and marvel at. And there were a lot of them who they wanted to get it back, but they didn't know how to do it. And this guy Filippo Brunelleschi, he also was the guy. I'll talk about him next week. But he, the Dome of Santa Maria del Fiore, which is in Florence, which is if you see pictures of Florence, Italy, you will see a big dome on a church, and it's the largest masonry dome ever made. Brunelleschi figured that out after about 150 years passed, 150 years earlier, that section of this Gothic church had been destroyed. And the model that was made to rebuild it, someone had been to Rome and they made a model with a really large dome on it. And the church approved it, the bishop blessed it. The problem is that no one knew how to build a dome, not anywhere close. And it took 150 years before Brunelleschi came along and figured it out.
Cool.
So part of it was that, like that, it's interesting. It's like basically the client drove the innovation that in some respects was this spark for reclaiming that knowledge. And it's very interesting, how do you rebuild, how do you get back to, what the Romans were able to do when nobody knows how? Because they were gone. They were either dead or they were living in Constantinople. There. Okay. Okay. Now, any questions? There's a lot to know. What is considered to be the beginning of the modern era is somewhere around the year 1500. And that might seem like a long time ago. Like what we consider modern might be something more recent. And, the 19th century might be considered kind of like, antique and very old. But the ideas of, like a lot of the ideas that we work with, a lot of the technologies that we work with, a lot of that started 500, almost 600 years ago. And so in terms of history, I remember when I studied history, I was working on my bachelor's degree. I remember being surprised that in terms of the study of history, the year 1500 is considered to be the beginning of the modern era. And we're just about to, now we're kind of like, we're there. We're just about there within the, context of this course. And you can see we've gone through a long period, a lot of centuries in just a few weeks here. And it's going to get slower because, there's a lot more that happens in each century. And of course, it's not all so, neat, like, different movements overlap. Styles are shared back and forth between cultures. What we're going to see next week when I talk about the Italians with the Renaissance and Baroque, you're going to see what really could be considered the first round of neoclassicism, where the classics of the Romans, like the Romans and the Greeks especially, a little bit of the Egyptians, depending on, not the Renaissance is Roman primarily, some Greek, but mostly Roman. Later on, when the other, like English and French, a few centuries later, resuscitate this, they bring the Egyptian along with it. So, and then you just get multiple cycles of people like reacquainting themselves with Greek, Roman, and Egyptian design. And, in Western Europe and the United States, which is our focus, that's sort of like the dominant, everyone always wants, everyone wants to be the heir to the Romans. The Florentines next week, heirs to the Romans. Louis XIV, heir to Rome. Napoleon, even that awful man Adolf Hitler. If he had won World War II, he had a model of how he was going to rebuild the city of Berlin, and it would have looked like this image of, in some respects, it would have looked a little bit like a modern Rome. because Rome has this very strong pull on the imagination of nation builders, because it was a very successful empire for a stretch of many centuries. Even when it was declining, it was still successful. Okay, I think that's enough talking from me. Do you have any questions before we stop? Oh, I didn't mean to do that. I'm going to stop the recording.